we're back. Stripe Show Podcast. I'm your host, Travis Fulton. Welcome back into the studio here, Jacksonville, Florida. This is number 2 of 4 of the in-studio series. A lot of you were here for the first one, which was great. J.C. Deacon, the head coach of the Florida Gators, was in here. We talked about the driver. We talked about some power and accuracy. That's out there. Go check that out. The next 2 that are coming up in January, we got Parker McLaughlin coming in, who is a former PGA Tour player. I think one of the best short game coaches in the game. He works with a laundry list of PGA Tour and LPGA Tour players. He's going to be here at the end of January. I was fortunate enough to get that done kind of on the tail end of the PGA show when he's in town. I promise you're not going to want to miss that one. Really good stuff. And then in March, right to kick off Players Championship Week, I have Dana Dahlquist, who I think is someone that I've learned a great deal from over the years. He's from California, works with a lot of players, including Bryson DeChambeau and many others. He's an excellent full swing coach, and we'll get into some full swing details in March. But today is all about the putter. So this is kind of cool because, you know, the specialization of the sport has really taken off. I remember when I got into teaching, I've been doing this for 25 years now, which is hard to believe, actually over 25 years, teaching full time. And when I got into the industry, like the way the game was taught then versus the way that it is now, there's a lot of similarities, but there's a lot of differences too. A lot of differences in the full swing. And I even think a lot of differences in putting too, which we'll get into some here today. And I think what's really fascinating is through that journey is how the specialization of the sport has taken off. Like 25 years ago, you were like a coach, like you're all things, you know, full swing, short game putting, and I do all that, and Marcus has dabbled in all that as well. But then as the game got bigger, more money came into the professional game, more amateurs playing, all of a sudden you started to see short game coaches, putting coaches, fitness, golf specialists, club fitting is, this over here, like what this all is about, and True Spec and how they fit here, is so far beyond how I used to fit and what's available and the technology and the shafts and the head. It's amazing how each leg and component has just taken off. And one of them is putting. So we're really, really fortunate here today to have one of the top putting coaches in the game, Marcus Potter. Welcome, buddy.
Appreciate you having me.
All right. So this is a little bit of a Northwest thing. He's from the Northwest as well, as you all know that I am. You guys are surrounded by Seahawks and Mariners fans today, so you're just going to have to deal with it here as we go through this. But Marcus, I got to know Marcus a few years ago, and when I was out there doing a lot of stuff with the Golf Channel, we were traveling around, and he was like, hey, I want to get to the East Coast and teach more. And I was like, hey, I'm building a studio, you should do it here. And so over the last couple of years, when he's kind of traveling through here, because he spent, 35?
Did 31 tournaments. That doesn't include all the other weeks of travel.
So 31 to 35 weeks out there on tour. I was like, hey, when you're here, why don't you teach out of here? So when he's in town, he does a fair amount of his individual lessons right here and sets up his technology. But Marcus, we're going to talk about a lot of stuff here today in putting. But before we get to some of the components of the setup and the stroke and greens rating and all that, I read something a long time ago. You actually started teaching online on Instagram. That's really where it started for you?
Yeah. It's probably one of the most unique starting points. Was my senior year of college. Had a bunch of free time because I wasn't playing for the team anymore at this point. I was done with that. And so I had time, and so I was searching Instagram one day, and I couldn't find a putting page. I was always a good putter, had a passion for it. And I noticed there's a million swing pages. George Gankis was kind of blowing up around that time on Instagram. And I really appreciated how he was kind of doing it his own way. He was having success with guys doing what he was doing. So I was like, let's start a putting page. So kind of started talking about, I'd post a video of Jason Day or Tiger Woods and talk about what I like, what they do. It was anonymous at first. People didn't know who I was. I didn't show my face because I was 23 at the time and I looked like I was 19. So I didn't really want my age to be like a huge negative. So I kind of built an audience before I really introduced who I was. And it was honestly a good way of doing it.
Yeah.
And then sold my first online lesson to a guy in Australia for $15.
Wow. So 10,000 online lessons later.
Yeah.
10,000. Over 10,000 online lessons working on putting. where they're sending people from all over the world taking pictures of it, of their setup, their stroke from face on, target line, sending it to him, and then he coaching it up. Here's what I want you to do. And so a lot of this, as you know, the silver lining in some ways in COVID was golf, and that people could still golf, and online lessons took off and exploded.
Yeah.
So him getting set up before that and taking off, and I did a fair amount. I mean, that's an incredible amount of online lessons, but it exploded from there for him, and he became sought after. And some of his students include Lee Hodges, who is top, 75 in the world now?
I think he's fallen out a little bit, but he might have. But yeah, he was as high as 54, but he's
Yeah.
probably around 75 right now.
Won on the PGA Tour last year. Andrew Landry, he may have heard of. Jimmy Stanger's a local guy that he started working with, got his PGA Tour card last year. And there's another name, but I can't mention it. He's going to have to mention it. Or maybe I should mention it. That way you don't get in trouble.
Not right now.
Okay, well maybe I'll slip it in there as we go, but he started working with him as well, and I'll just tell you that he's one of the best players in the world, and if I said his name, you would know it instantly, and he's helping him with his putting now. So we'll slip that in later. Let's get into some of the technique, and I want to start with just, if you could share with the audience kind of maybe just your general philosophy and how you look at putting itself.
So I honestly try to look at putting as the most simplistic view possible. Putting is ultimately three things. It's start line, green reading, and speed control, not in any necessarily one of those orders. But it's just those three things. And how you break it down to get into those three things is different for each person. There's different ways to do it. But I think that's kind of a good starting point for people is putting's not that complicated. It's the simplest part of golf. It's hard because greens are imperfect surfaces. Even if you have a perfect read, hit the perfect putt with perfect speed, it might not go in. But overall, it's the simplest aspect of the game. And that's really trying how I like to people to view it, because it's so easy to get lost in the weeds with what you're doing if putts aren't going in, even though you might be doing the right thing.
Yeah. So line, distance control,
Green reading.
green reading.
That's it.
Those are the three. All right. So let's kind of attack line first, and we've got a couple pictures up here, and I would assume that as you start looking at the line in the starting direction of the putt, the setup is going to have something to do with it. And I know that like everybody's a little different, and when you're working with top players, you really want to dissect them and get to know them, and like you're not teaching one way fits all.
Yeah.
But for the masses, through all the years of teaching, all these tens of thousands of lessons, share some of the general things that you like from a setup perspective.
I'll kind of show it actually.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So the most common thing I see and why people really struggle, like for the going back again, this is kind of for the average golfer, is a lot of the time the ball ends up too far back. That gets people's weight back, and next thing you know, the shaft actually leans back. And from here, people don't really have any chance. This is kind of when people start taking really long backstrokes, short follow-throughs, or even the opposite, where they'll be really short because they don't really necessarily have anywhere to go, and then long follow-throughs, versus when you just get someone in a really decent setup to start, it automatically is going to help the stroke. So the first thing I would say is kind of stance, weight distribution with the stance, and then where that ball position lies. And those two kind of go hand in hand. So again, this is for average golfer, right-handed. I'm going to want to see pretty much stance width, kind of, that's varying a lot. Stance width is something that will vary, but weight distribution is what I care more about. And when it comes to that, typically around 50-50 is going to be pretty ideal, or anything up to 60 on that left foot, 60% here. And what that's going to do is it's just going to allow you to kind of be a little more locked in, and you can just kind of stay in one spot and not have any sort of movement because you're already kind of in a stable position. And then once you get your kind of weight distribution nailed down and kind of get where you want to be, again, let's just kind of go center here, then it kind of goes back to ball position. And ball position, I like going off of people's face. So even me right now, I don't know where this is exactly going to go, but I typically like having it off my left cheek. And that's really kind of where I think for most people, it's left cheek to left ear, assuming proper weight distribution. And that's going to be a great check for people. Because if you start getting back here and the ball's up there, you're like, okay, something's off because the ball's outside of my head. And now you've got a decent check to know where you are each time, just simply by looking at it from a face-on view. You don't need any sort of lines or anything. You can just see, oh, wow, that ball's outside of my head. So either the ball's in the wrong spot or my weight distribution's off, and those two kind of go hand in hand.
How much shaft lean do you like?
Shaft lean, so kind of pull out a training aid that I like to people to do with this. So shaft lean is very dependent on the individual putter the setup of the individual person. But I like using, this is just a Pell's putting tutor here.
So real quick, shaft lean is from the face-on perspective is how much from this side to side, okay? So how much in general would you say there?
So it goes back to, again, each putter is going to be different, how they sit. So this obviously has a little offset to it. But every putter has a specific specific spot where the face is square. And so this putter in particular, I can't see any of the actual face when that putter is perfectly square. And so that's why I like using this Pell's, any sort of straight edge you can do this on. But I like guys kind of practicing this and then simply removing that and getting back into it. Okay, I know that face is square, and that goes into shaft lean to me, because when that face is square, wherever the shaft lean is where it should be.
So the face disappears from your view.
On this putter in particular.
Yeah.
But like an Odyssey with the white hot, you're going to see, most of them, you see all of the white hot faces. I don't like that, and that's an individual preference, not that that's right or wrong. Some guys like seeing the face, some guys don't. Kind of goes into a little bit of setup, a little bit of loft.
Okay.
But that's one thing in terms of shaft lean. I look at it more, where is the face? And when the face is square, that's where the hand should be. Because like Matt Kuchar is an example, uses right arm lock. So his shaft is literally this far back because it's locked up his right arm, and he's got negative loft on his putter.
So when you look at, I want to go to this view, because this is always an interesting view, I think, for a lot of people. This is Christian Bezuidenhout, top player on the PGA Tour. So I'm gonna tee up on this, all right? For me, and I know you and I, we've went back and forth on this a little bit. For me, when I look at that setup, can everyone see how his forearms kind of match up to the putter shaft? Right, so like the forearms are, on the same plane as the putter shaft, right? Like I could lay this down, my arms and the putter would hit at the same time. Like, so that wouldn't, that's different. So for the masses, right, getting the forearms to match up some, kind of soft elbows per se, you like that for the masses? Or like, because I know I've seen some of you, we've talked where like, well, it's okay to be here too, and I'll show some examples of that.
Yeah, and I think for the most part, that's not a bad thing. The way I look at that, and this is something we have a couple slides on later, it's more just about where people's arms naturally hang, because some people have long arms. And if you have long arms, they're naturally going to hang lower, and that's going to draw them to kind of angle it out differently. Like Tiger's one person, I don't know his body type, but he just liked having his hands low.
He couldn't putt though, so that's not.
And so yeah, you can go to that slide actually, that'd be good to show. But he just had it
Tiger Woods.
Yeah, he just liked having his hands low, and anytime you do that, you're never going to have it through. But if you the way I look at it with people is it kind of goes back to a little bit of putter setup. A lot of these guys, so this is Cam Smith, obviously, and Tiger. There's no way these shafts, Cam Smith's a little closer, but these lines are not matching up. And if people will say the angle's off, you do it from any angle, it's going to show the same thing. And so that to me, these are people that probably have a little more handsy of a stroke. Their arms are they're a little more relaxed. But then if you go to the Jason Day one now.
Oh boy, the Jason Day one.
Jason Day and Luke.
Which one is that?
Just to the right there.
That one?
Yeah. This is the other end of the spectrum. Again, two phenomenal putters here doing it a completely different way. They're just more upright, but you also will notice they're a little more face balanced putters, a little more mallet. It's a little more upright, but a lot of that is, I've found it to not necessarily be a hindrance or a benefit at times. Some guys, I definitely want to fall into that.
Okay.
But it really, to me, goes back into how the individual's body and how they set up.
Okay.
But I think it's not a bad thing to do. But if someone's low and they have to feel like they get up here and this is uncomfortable, it's not going to benefit them. They're going to be able to have more performance from being comfortable and getting into something more like Tiger and Cam Smith.
What's interesting, one of the best examples of this is Scotty Scheffler. He struggled putting big time last year. And Scotty's always he's never been a great putter, but his arms are pretty straight, a little more like Tiger, rebuilt it a little bit, definitely went more this route, got the forearms matched up, felt a little too hunched over, kind of found the happy medium, off he went. So it was almost like he went, from this to the middle. And, and off he went. One thing it seems, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but if you have a player because I see a lot of players, when they come in, this will be pretty high, and you'll see the putter head kind of drift out.
Yep.
You know, so it kind of goes out and then across, and then they got to manipulate the face. And so when they get this to be a little more here on plane, then that natural path
Yep.
starts to arc a little bit more, right? And we want a little arc.
Yep. So go to one of these. I need to show you which one it is.
Yeah.
The individual photos.
Yeah.
I think it's that one.
Okay.
No, it's the other one. It's really hard to see. So that one, yeah. Nope,
Which one?
this one.
All right, I got you. Or the other one. That's the only one I got. Look at that. I downloaded the same one, not the other one. All right.
Okay.
You have to
so
worry that.
it's a little harder to see, but this right here, kind of going back to exactly what Travis was just talking about. If you look at the legs here, you can't see the right leg. And that means, because this is from perfectly ball line, down ball line, these are perfectly squared up here. So the other photo, what you would have seen the person with, this is an extreme example, you would have been able to see their right leg. So what we did there, simply square up the hips. Goes right in line with getting the forearms in line. So this is something I learned from Paul Vazonko at Scotty Cameron, who's worked with Tiger Woods, with any good player who's used a Scotty Cameron. He has a ton of video data on them. So I've seen a lot of this, and this is one of the things he's picked up on. If people's hips are squared up and forearms are squared up, their body movement is incredibly reduced. I mean, he's got countless videos of Spieth, Cantlay, different guys who, when they're in an off position, whether it be open or whatever, their body moves to compensate to try and get centered. And he goes, when you just get set up square, it's crazy what it does for people's body movement. It doesn't let people kind of move. And it just goes back to, again, where you can just kind of set up and just turn and go through.
Yeah.
So that's been a big piece, getting both the forearms and hips. You kind of see it more through people's legs.
Yeah.
But I guarantee you, I see this with tour players, with average players, with good college players. Most everyone's hips are pretty open.
Are pretty open?
Open. And it's really interesting. The other benefit is people feel like I'm incredibly locked in when you do that. Just by squaring up those hips a little bit, you feel like you really kind of have a stable lower body, and the upper body can kind of move independently.
That's interesting. Yeah, so hips, so what you're saying is hips, shoulders, forearms kind of.
Yep.
But the tendency is this tends to get open.
That's the big one. Kind of same with you, the right arm gets high for a lot of people as well. And that's when you'll see people kind of tucking that right arm.
Yeah.
But getting the hips and forearms in particular squared up does incredible things for people's body movement and path. Kind of like we were talking earlier, you mentioned your path a little bit.
Yeah.
That would be one of the first things I would have checked is where is your body aimed?
Because your path tends to get too out.
Yeah, I go straight back, and then as I come through, I tend to go left.
But if you think about that, if your hips are open, it's going to go pretty straight, and then it's going to follow your hips coming through. So that's going to be out and left.
Most putters, before we get to the stroke, because I want to talk about the engine here in a minute. So, because this goes in the setup, most putters on the shelf are 35 inches, right?
It's probably too long for most people.
Most. And what's interesting is that 35 inches, if you notice with the head cover, fits in a golf bag, right? So I'm convinced why they're made 35 is because they fit in a golf bag. But most of the time that's too long. 34-ish seems to be a good number. A lot of people need 33 and a half, 33.
Yep.
So that gets into how far I stand from it in hip hinge.
Where your eyes fall, where everything.
Where
Putter length is a huge factor.
Where everything falls. One of the things that I'll do oftentimes is I find a lot of people, they'll stand close to get their eyes over it, but then their weight sits back. So I get in, my eyes are over it, because I know I want my eye, and then I kind of sink back. Now the counter to that is I get too far away, and now I'm top heavy. I'm on my toes, trying to get my eyes over it. And so it's like there's kind of that. Do you like the happy medium, balls of the feet, in the center?
So I look at it, so set up to it real quick to kind of be able to show people this. So if I'm looking at someone's video, I'm drawing a line from where their armpits fall.
Okay.
So Travis would be kind of more about right on that current
right
setup. He's finding more middle of the foot. In an ideal world, I want to see that line kind of right here.
You want more there.
And so that's going to get people over it. This is kind of almost a little bit of a Genghis thing where it just allows you to be more able to rotate. You're going to be in a better position because you're over here and you're kind of stable and locked in.
So if I'm here, it's too far back. And if I'm here, it's too far out.
Yeah, because you don't want to it always goes off people's feet.
Yeah.
And that's a good way to kind of see things as well. But I've found that to be a good kind of check to see where people are. And then head and neck position.
So talk about the neck.
So the common thing that every putting coach who is kind of really good with their eyes or talks about the eyes, everyone wants as flat of a neck as humanly possible. Like in a perfect world, if you had a flat neck, it's easier for you to see down the line versus if you're up here, how do you see what's down here? So that's kind of why the common thing for any sort of setup, which we were talking about Nicholas a little bit earlier, he was very over.
Yeah.
Kind of helped. He was a little more cockeyed with it, but he's probably got his eyes aligned a little bit with what he was seeing in terms of his setup.
So in general, maybe not so much like this, where you're looking like out of the bottom of your eyes, but maybe like turning the neck down a little bit. Yeah.
It's almost kind of at first it's a little bit of an unnatural feel
Yeah.
because you feel like you're looking more down than you should. But it's been a shock to see how well people see, kind of visually.
Yeah. Well, we talked about that today, right? And that helps my putting because I get like this. I'll find myself like, what am I doing? Like get my neck turned down so I'm looking straight down at it, and then go. Talk about.
Can we kind of go into one of these?
Yeah, do it. Yeah.
So just on the point of while we were talking about kind of visuals, so this is a drill I learned from Farnsworth. And I think this is a really good drill. This is something people can do at home. This will benefit your full swing, your putting, everything in golf. So I'll just kind of do it from down here.
Yeah.
So all you do, he's talked about, find a 10-foot piece of tape. So like just blue tape, put it in your garage, 10 feet, and set up like you're gonna hit anything. So it'll be here. And so set up, first thing would be cover your right eye and then trace that tape down and back. It should take about 45 seconds to go down and back. And then you go both eyes, trace down and back, again, 45 seconds, and then right eye. So what you're doing is you're training your eyes to see. So that was, we spent about 3 hours with Craig Farnsworth one day, and that was kind of his big thing was the eyes are like anything in the body. They need to be trained. They need to be told what to do pretty much.
So you're looking down the eye, one eye, both eyes, then the other eye.
And do that for about 5 minutes a day, and you'll be amazed by what it does because it's teaching your head how to turn as well. Because one of the things he pointed out, he goes, a lot of people that hit low left hooks look low left. They don't look up to the target. And this is kind of something you maybe have seen with people hitting into a net without any sort of feedback. A lot of the time, if you're hitting into a net, your target would be more here, but the ball is here. So you're kind of push that out almost, and a lot of people start swinging more out into a net, and that's kind of almost what can happen with just how you're looking. So that's why little checks like that
right there.
make
and
a
kind
huge
of training
difference.
and training one eye individually and then both eyes, and you're not standing up and you're just using your neck, right? Swiveling.
And this learning how to turn, and because my question to him was, so let's say someone was in a weird spot to see straight, like I needed to be a little contorted to see straight down the line. I was like, if someone works on a drill like that, what would that do for their head? He goes, if they do that, it'll naturally get their head into a more normal position. Just because their eyes have been trained or have gotten to the way they are because of their body or whatever. And so by training things like that, it'll get back into a good spot.
Let's talk about the engine of the stroke, right? One of the most common questions I get. All right, I'm set up. All right, what's moving, right? Because in the golf swing, it's like, all right, we've got to get the club head working out and up, and the hands are coming in. I'm starting to turn my hip. All these 24 components start moving. In putting, it's all right, not as much as moving. So what is moving? And I know again it varies, but talk us through what's powering this thing.
Can you go to that Jimmy Stanger video?
Right.
I think it's the bottom, that one right there, yeah.
That's not it. That's
There we
it.
go.
There it is.
So this is a great drill right here, what he's doing. I'm gonna kind of show you guys in a second. It's just got chopstick drill, people call it, alignment sticks under the armpits. But this has kind of been a big teacher for people of what the driver of the stroke is. So I've become, and everyone feels it slightly differently. Some people feel it in the shoulder, some people feel it in the chest, some people feel rib rotation. I've heard a lot of different things that people feel the power of the stroke. Doing this drill, I've heard people say different things. They're like, oh, I feel my shoulders, I feel my chest, I feel my upper back. Everyone's gonna have a slightly different feel, but I think something like this, so what you do is you put these sticks under your armpits. I like kind of hands on top because it actually provides some structure for that. And what this kind of forces you to do is you can't really just get armsy with it. That just doesn't look right. And so it forces you to, in my opinion, I feel chest rotation. And what that does is keeps everything right together. This doesn't let the arms outrace anything. This doesn't let the hands outrace anything. This gets the body rotating really well. And it kind of allows people to feel their version of what powers the stroke. Again, whether it be the shoulders, the chest, the back, the rib cage. And it kind of lets people learn it on their own because everyone's different with that.
Because it is a turn, right? I mean,
I call it a turn, yeah.
yeah, it is like a mini pivot, a mini turn. It's not. Is it rock? It's not.
I don't like the term rocking because I feel like it goes like that.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you're in a decent setup and you already have your angle built, by turning, you're already going to do that. You already have that motion kind of built in. And one of my favorite things was Xander at the PGA this year. Xander's obviously one of the best putters in the world. Love his stroke. I think it was said before he made his putt to win, he was like, big muscle move. What exactly is that drill doing? That's a big muscle move.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm a big fan of that stuff. Because I use that drill a lot with people that arms outrace their body, anything like that. If the chest just isn't rotating at all,
Yeah.
you kind of get really quick feedback, and then it's easy to translate that into kind of a normal stroke as well.
Can you? The other one I see you do a lot. What is the? I don't think you have it here with the
I do,
sternum.
actually.
Do you?
Yeah.
Show them that here, because these are two things. Like, this is what I love about this, and you'll notice Marcus, like when he teaches, he does a really good job creating the environment and the context, and then it's like the students discovering within it, right? And so like when you do that drill, what one might say versus what I might say, it's totally different. And what he's doing, he's just making sure you're doing the drill right. Here's another one that I think is great for context.
So it's a similar style drill to this, but it just, again, gets everything working more together. Kind of creates, what I've seen with this, Lee Hodges in particular, Lee, we worked with, he was on Korn Ferry, but it was more online. And one thing I found with the elite players, you kind of need to be there more in person. But he had a stroke where it was like, fine going back, but the putter exited really hard left. And honestly, he was putting pretty decent at the time, so I wasn't really trying to mess with it. But I never really understood where that came from. And when we got him on this, it instantly went from in, super in, to in, right down the line. And he's like, he goes, that feels so different. He goes, I feel like I'm rotating coming through. So what he felt like he was doing before was he was just pulling it with his arms. So that thing would go hard left coming through. And then when he got on this, it gave him the feel of the hands, arms, and chest more rotating together. And that putter instantly kind of did what we wanted it to do.
Wow. So where are you putting that on your chest?
So this honestly can go really anywhere. Because like, done it with Wes before. For taller people, you got to go a little lower on you. But anywhere in the sternum, chest, again, height's a factor for it. You can obviously adjust this. But just setting up to this, hitting putts, getting that feel of everything working together is big.
Talk about the lower body. What's happening there? Anything?
So I like seeing obviously as stable of a lower body as possible. There's just simple things like people put workout bands.
Yeah.
Kind of put workout bands around the knees, maintain that space, and that kind of training you to be more. But going back to, again, if things are squared up, your lower body movement's going to be in a much better spot.
Head steady. The biggest thing that you mentioned earlier was like kind of the backup move, and this is something like these two drills that I just showed you, fantastic. Get the forearms in there, grip, start doing those, stable lower. What am I feeling? And as you're doing that, like the head's just is steady, right? And the most common thing with the head would be, the backup. Where you get the backup, and usually when you get the backup, you'll hit it low on the putter face. You'll catch it very low. Your hands will want to start to engage more.
Face is going to be off.
Face is all over the place. So this, not here, and just kind of bringing this full circle now. It's like, all right, I got my setup. my forearms matched up, and drop, bowed forward, weight's a little, weight's set, got the ball right. I've got my sticks and everything's moving good.
Because once you're there, if you're in that setup,
Yeah.
all you have to do is just rotate.
Right.
Just stay centered and rotate.
But I think it's like, how do I rotate? And I think
and that's where
that helps. You know what I'm
these-
saying? Those help big time at what it means to you to rotate properly around a stable lower and a head that's not backing up.
And that's exactly that'll give that drill specifically to people that have a big fallback. Because a lot of the
Okay.
times that big fallback is the arms outracing the body.
Okay.
So the body's trying to create a little bit of balance by falling back. That happens in the full swing, as you know.
Yep.
And that's why, that's one of the most universal drills I give to people, just simply
it.
for that reason.
Let me ask you this before. I've always wanted to ask you this, and I never have. I just thought of it. On the idea of not backing up. Remember Briny Baird?
I use that drill all the time with
Do you?
people. All the
Anybody remember
time.
Briny Baird, that name? So Briny Baird played on tour like this. This is how he putted. He pulled his right foot back. He put the ball right off his foot, and that's how he putted. And I use that drill every day in here for short game, and sometimes putting,
I use it all the time for putting.
to keep people to not back up, right? And so I'm sitting there thinking to myself, like, why not just putt like that? Like, why not just pull your foot back? It kind of helps get square, and just keep your head right there. Because if you back up, you're gonna lose your balance.
Yep. I give that drill religiously to people
Do you really?
too. Yeah.
Wow.
Because I've had people combine the alignment stick drill and that. Because I'm like, if you really want to ultimately feel it, you're going to have to rotate and stay centered here. If you're on your, because I'll tell people to exaggerate it, where I want you on your toe. So you almost have no support at all.
Do that with the toe.
It's like if you're just on your toe, you're going to have to stay here. Versus if you kind of have any sort of fallback, you're not going to have, like Travis said, you're not going to have any sort of space.
If you hit it
to
low
move.
in the face, if you hit putts down in here, the bottom, a lot, it's good.
Yeah.
It gives you that really sensation of staying, right there. All right, now I want to get into, we're going to open it up here. I know we're going to plenty of time here for questions, but we're kind of cruising here, some setup. Okay, we're the power of the stroke. Now I want to talk about, because we're going to get into some practice stuff too, because you have some really good practice stuff. But this next topic, I think, is one that is a learning curve for most, and that is the stroke length as it pertains to how far back to how far through. Okay, now I'm going to set you up, and then you're going to run with it. So you can have a 1-to-1 ratio, let's say, which is, relatively equal back, equal through. That's give or take. You could have a 1-to-2 ratio, which is, it's shorter back but longer through. You could have a 2-to-1 ratio, which is longer back to shorter through, right? So those are like the three buckets. What do you see most? Because I know there's a little bit, but what do you see most on tour?
On tour, so this kind of goes back into the evolution of putting. I feel like this is probably the biggest area of evolution of putting, because forever you heard accelerate, hit it hard. It kind of goes back to, I've had a report, that green reading report from like 1970, I believe, or so, right around there. And it's all the best golf courses in the country, and Oakmont's the fastest greens at like 8. Wow. I think Hilton Heads, which Hilton Heads are just dead flat to begin with, they were like 5.8 or something. And so that has been a huge contributing factor to the equipment change, to loft. They used to have a ton of loft on putters, and you kind of had to hit it. You had to get them up, but now we don't have to. And so this kind of leads into where a philosophy change of, before it was short back, long through, because you almost needed acceleration. You needed to hit it to get it there. But greens roll 14 sometimes on tour. So now on tour, pretty much you'll see equidistant or long back, short through. You're definitely not really seeing, there's Bo Hosser being probably the best one that comes to mind that's relatively short and long. He's had multiple years where he's top 10 strokes gained putting on tour. Liddy Ko.
Yeah.
And there's outliers in everything in golf.
Yep.
That's not something we really build anything off of. But a lot of the time you're seeing, like Cam Smith's probably the poster child now of the modern stroke.
2-to-1.
And his exact thing is, I feel like I hit the putt in his backstroke. That's what he says all the time. And that goes into, you can't do that 2-to-1 ratio if you're slow going back.
Right.
And this is where a metronome's become one of the biggest pieces for me as a coach now, where I will never have to say anything about people's stroke length if they have really good skill at matching the beats on a metronome. Like I've gone from guys who have been really short, have had terrible speed control, to once they actually spend some time and get that beat or get those beeps down. So we'll talk about it. A 2-beep system, I want people to start at 67 BPM. A 2-beep system is first beep, start of stroke, second beep, impact. And that holds true whether it's a 5-footer or a 50-footer. And so if you think about it, the timing is going to be the same on every stroke, or it should be roughly the same. And the only way you're going to do that, a 5-footer can be a little slower, a little smoother. But if you're going to hit a 50-footer at the same timing of a 5-footer, how much faster does your backstroke have to be? It has to be a lot faster. And it's a little bit of a revelation for people when they actually kind of do it and they don't blast putts. They actually hit putts with good speed, because I'll measure people all day when they come in, they have a short backstroke, long follow through, put them on a quintic, then we'll get those measurements. Okay, you're accelerating a ton. Turn the quintic off, get on a metronome, get them down, get kind of dialed in on it, turn the quintic back on, measure it, they're one acceleration in a perfect ballpark.
And as a result, it's longer back, shorter through?
Yep. And that it's funny too, because I really feel like speed control in general should be pretty natural. Like I'm gonna throw a ball to you, I shouldn't have to think about it, I should just do it, right? And that's how I feel like putting should be. And when everyone's had great putting rounds, you don't have to think about speed, it's just hitting it.
Yeah.
And that's what I believe that this does. It makes it more natural. The crazy thing to me about the metronome, and I've proved this on the quintic with tour players, with beginners, with everyone, it helps every aspect of putting. When you get your timing of the stroke nailed down, I've seen face angle at impact massively get better, launch control get better. It's just by people not focusing on trying to make a perfect stroke and just having pretty authentic movement, it really cleans things up.
It's funny, like some of the takeaways here, we're powering the stroke, and then if you think about, okay, I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna practice a 10-footer, and I'm gonna try to take it a little longer back and shorter throw, which for most, that you might be doing that already, which is great. If not, that would be new for you. Okay, but what would happen is, for those that are very short back and long through, which is the way putting was taught 25 years ago, it was like be smooth and then accelerate, right? And you could see the hit. And that's like equivalent to going from 0 to 65, like you're just hitting the gas, right? So we're going 0 to 65, there's an acceleration phase. Well, if I go 2-to-1, I've got to pick up the pace of the stroke going back. It's got to get more brisk, it's got to pick up. And as it picks up to that shorter finish, now it's more cruise control. So the pace of the putter head is moving consistently back and through to the metronome. And so that's like, I'm just cruising at 65 through impact, because I'm cruising at 65 going back. That makes sense, everybody? That is a major, major shift in putting, I'm telling you. And I'll tell you, the guy that put it on the map is Jordan Spieth back in 2017. When Jordan Spieth was making every putt he literally looked at and winning everything. And I'll tell you a quick story, because I want to keep going on this. This is when it hit me like, wow, this is a totally different movement. And Aim Point was coming on board, and green people are going like this, and everybody's like, what is going on with putting right now, right? I was working at Golf Channel, I was doing a show, and the producer asked me, he goes, I want you to break down Spieth's putter, his stroke, because it's something's different. Like, Spieth was the poster child of longer back, shorter throw. Boom. I mean, it was like, pew. I mean, he'd just stop it right there. I mean, it was just brisk and boom, and just hit the brakes. And go watch him, and he was making everything. And so we did this breakdown, and I'm showing him on, and I'm saying he's longer back, shorter through. It's 2-to-1, and it's the idea is it's brisk, and I was talking to Cameron McCormick about it, and it's cruise control. And so, like, wait a minute, he's decelling, right? Because that's what you would think, right? It's a deceleration if it's shorter through, and it's like, no, it's got more pace going back. So it's brisk, and then he uses that momentum to the short finish. And so it was like a big learning curve. We did this segment and we go through it. It's like, great, everything was great. And then the next hour, we had Lydia Ko in the studio. And so I just did this whole thing on 2-to-1 ratio. And Lydia Ko's sitting there and I'm interviewing her and I said, Lydia, how do you think about your stroke? She says, I take it back really short and I accelerate to a longer finish. And I just like, oh my gosh.
And that was when she was killing it.
That's when she was number one in the world. She was number one in the world. And she goes, I take it shorter back and longer through it. And I was sitting there and the producer in my ear, he's like, you dumbass. Like, this is not what they do. It's like, it is what they do. But the point was, there was like, you can go both ways, right? But the point is that, and Jordan was one, there was a transformation happening at that point. I mean, there really was. And Jordan was the poster child of, hey guys, this is actually better for distance control and better, to his point, hitting the center of the face and all those things.
And like, it's like Bo Hostler I've worked with for a little bit and measured him on Quintic. What makes him good, like I told him before we got on it, I'm like, dude, this thing's going to hate your acceleration. Yeah. It's going to hate a little bit of the things you do, but we're not going to care about that because you're already elite. We're going to care about other areas. But it goes back to, you're not going to change someone's natural thing, but for the average golfer, that's just not going to be beneficial. Right.
You know, it's funny too. The other thing on this that I find, and this is just my own person, it's really helped my putting. It helps me like get it going. I don't feel like I'm steering, like super slow, and then it's like it frees you up. Like you get it, there's some fluidity to it, and then you match it up. And it takes a while to learn how to calibrate it, but it's pretty impactful stuff. I mean, it really is cool.
I mean, it's probably been one of the bigger revelations, like the metronome specifically. And like how much that can just change people overnight just by working on that. It's been unbelievable to see.
All right, before we get to the questions here, I want to do a little rapid fire here, okay? Because we've got some people in here who do some other different things, and for the audience, it's like, oh, this is great. There's probably some things like, okay, yeah, I'm going to go try that in my stroke. We get to the point sometimes it does get psychological putting, right? And it's like, I have to start over and do something different, right? Like something dramatically different with my putting.
If you're like most golfers, you blame yourself when you miss a short putt. So after you hold back the urge to throw your putter in the lake, don't do that. You try to fix your putting stroke. But how long does that last? 1 week, 1 round, 1 hole? There's a company called Lab Golf that doesn't think you should be blaming yourself. That's because all putters have this thing called torque, which means the putter face is trying to twist during the stroke, so you grip it like a snake. What Lab Golf did is they figured out how to make putters with no torque. They call it lie angle balance, and you have to feel it to believe it. I did. The Lab Golf putter, you don't have to use a funny putting grip to try to keep the face square. You can putt it any way you want because Lab Golf putter stays perfectly square by itself. It's effortless. To see how much easier putting can be, head over to labgolf.com.
And so we're going to do a little like 3 or 4 minutes on each one of these, all right? So the benefits of left hand low, cross-handed, and why one maybe should consider that.
So I feel like one of the main things is kind of how people's hands break down. A lot of people, and this is something I see a lot, people cast it, putter head passes the hands early, and anytime that happens, this is on the Quintic specifically is where I've learned this. Anytime the putter passes the hands is when you honestly can start to put backspin on a putt. Face control becomes really difficult, and you start line is impossible to do. And that's pretty much a killer move. No one really keeps the face square when they cast it. It's pretty hard to do. And one of the things I've given a lot of people for that is left hand low. Because if you're left hand low, you're already almost like Billy Horschel being the extreme example, someone who like really sets that angle, but you're kind of already presetting that angle, and the whole goal with that is to just not let it break down. And so that's why that would be ultimately the ideal thing for someone who's, and then on top of that, a lot of people have trouble with their shoulders, so it kind of gets their shoulders more level, which I've actually talked about this with Brad Faxon before. He's like, what are the benefits of people's shoulders being level? Like, what does it actually do? He's like, I couldn't come up with anything.
Yeah.
Square is different, but level. But like, that's one thing people have talked about, but I've never really bought into that. The big thing for me with left hand low is it goes back to the hand action. Andrew Landry being this, one of his videos actually, because Andrew Landry switched to left hand low from conventional because he had a really bad cast, and we were having trouble fixing. Is he on? I don't know if he's on those ones.
I just think I had the drill for him.
But either way, so he's a perfect example of someone who he was really struggling. I think he came to me and he was like negative 0.3 the year before per round. And so we were kind of getting things started. And he was really casting it when we started, really casting it. And I'm like, okay, dude, we got to try something different. So at Riviera, goes to left-hand low, and I think he gained about 6 shots that week.
Wow.
And he's never even thought about switching. But it was instantly, he's like, dude, I just feel like I can keep that there and rotate.
And so now you got the arm lock, right? And so Lab is a group that I do a lot of work with, and Lab putters have really taken off. I mean, they're great putters, and they're a partner of mine. And I reached out to him like 2 years ago when all these players were going to them and all of a sudden just winning, like Lucas Glover with the Broomstick, and then Will Zalatoris and Johnny Vegas, and I mean, it just was like the list. I was like, my God, everybody that goes to these putters is winning. And so they make a great product, and they do a really good job, I think, with the Broomstick, which we'll get to here in a second, but also an arm lock. And this isn't an arm lock. The one I have is a student has it, but you'll get the idea. Like, to his point, like left hand low, you start pushing that more up the line of the left forearm, right? And so I start feeling this gap between, if I go conventional, you see that wedge right there? I start getting rid of that wedge, and then that stays the same. And so you can run this up the line, like an arm lock, and that gives you that, concept even more to keep that lead side built up, which is different, from a kind of a face control standpoint, as he was saying, where when I break down, you can see how that wedge increases. And that's really what it is. Like, you form these wedges. You see the wedges between my forearms, and those wedges are really, just kind of staying in line. And those drills, you'll feel that.
So perfect video's up right now. Play this again. So if you watch the hands on this, he keeps his angles perfectly here. He doesn't, he's probably the extreme of someone who has next to no hand action in their putting, but kind of going back to exactly what you were just talking about.
Yeah.
He does it better than anyone I've seen, and he's a top 5 putter in the world.
And would you say that's kind of like, in some ways, the definition of keeping your hands out is keeping those wedges intact?
Perfect, yeah. Because they have to move, obviously.
Right.
But if that can stay perfectly still,
Yeah.
which a great drill for that is just simply putting a ball between your right wrist. So a lot of people it's a little more difficult to do at times, but you just put a ball right there. I'm having trouble putting that thing on. I actually have a different training aid for that. But you just put that in there and kind of set up and hit putts.
Yeah.
And it doesn't allow you to kind of do that.
Yeah.
Specifically, this training aid is what I have for it. It's a little easier. So it kind of molds on.
Oh, yeah.
So it literally goes flush
Oh,
on.
yeah.
You can put it to the grip.
Oh, that's cool.
And then you can just literally does that right there. So it just doesn't
That's
let
cool.
that wrist angle change.
I like that. I gotta get one of those.
Amazon, $10.
That's a cool device because I mean, look, that's a common deal right there, right?
So side note on that, Lee was struggling with the little hand action stuff. I searched Amazon for any sort of training aid that was like
Yeah.
that, and I found that one. Lee goes out. I putted really good that week. Switched to it at Riviera, but it was funny. It was the week Hideki won, and Hideki comes over on Tuesday and he goes, "What is that?" And then next thing you know, like next week, Hideki had one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like Hideki, you can see he's not a great putter. I mean, he's a good, obviously, but out there, he gets that rise and he gets that putter head swinging up a little soon and can get a little bit helpy with the wrist.
And that's he instantly caught his eye.
Yeah.
He's definitely one of the guys who
I could see where that would help him.
And
Yeah.
if he sees something that applies to him,
Yeah.
he's not afraid to go to someone and be like, "What is that?" and ask about it, which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah. So this just takes that left forearm wedge out of it closes it, right? And it puts the right wrist in a position where it's got more flexion too. It's more bent, and your right elbow tucks down more. And so you just kind of get into this little more superior position where it won't break down. Right? And so this is where, an arm lock or maybe some version of the left hand low, sometimes I'll start beginners left-hand low just to, get them set up. I do think it helps them square their shoulders and just kind of start building the stroke, the ratio of the stroke. And they start to, okay, I can stabilize my hands a little easier that way. And then as you go, you might, you can show
Honestly,
them
I never really thought about it like that. But
Yeah.
if like someone from the very beginning starting that way, it's going to keep their wrists more stable.
Yeah.
And and then eventually, if you switch them back to conventional, they already have that stability built in.
All right, so let me give you this one now because I just saw Scotty Scheffler doing it today in the Bahamas, right there. That's how he's putting. The saw. Why that way?
So this is kind of, some people go for that same cast issue.
Okay.
Kind of go back to that, where the right hand they feel like is taken over. But like Brandel was actually talking about this today, and I completely agree with him because he was talking about Scotty, obviously. But when the right hand's here, you just feel like it can go down the line. Mm-hmm. Like you can just take that and go right down the line. And that naturally is going to get it kind of turning over. And it's honestly, like Lee Hodges' this person will switch from claw to conventional if he's not feeling good. Mm-hmm. Like this year, he went through a bad spell, switched to the claw, and had his best stretch of weeks putting. Mm-hmm. And then it's just simple. But a lot of it just goes back to kind of it's taking the right hand a little bit out of it, forcing it to, again, just right hand issues is pretty much the main issue for most people. And so finding different ways to neutralize it. Again, there's pencil, claw, like every different iteration of it.
A lot of ways you can go with,
But it's definitely, I found it to be pretty good for face control for a lot of people. Because it almost mimics the face. Like if you can set that there and you keep your hand and you don't manipulate your hand, it's going to actually stay pretty square.
So you think which way does the hand want to flip? It wants to flip that way, underneath. So what you do is you turn it this way. So when you turn it, it kicks the elbow out and puts you here. So it's like you can't, you see what I'm saying? Like it's really hard. So it's an extreme version of taking this action, turning it, and then that gives them the feeling of keeping it out of the scenario.
It's actually the opposite of left-hand low. Because left-hand low, you're here.
Right.
And so you're going a different way again to try and neutralize the right hand in some way.
Yep. All right, my favorite one. So the broomstick. Okay, so this, why?
This is something that's so new that like we've talked about this before. Like instructors are still learning how to teach this properly because there's no right, there's no wrong necessarily, but I think it's a pretty decent method from a good. I mean, I'm working with a mini tour guy right now, and we just did a series of drills, and out of all my tour players, he's the only one to do some of these drills in the amount of time he's done it in, and he's a broomstick guy. Yeah. So I have this one drill. It's 4, 5, 6, 9, 12, 15. You got to make. If you miss a putt at 4, 5, 6, you go back to the tee before, and then once you get to the 9, 12, 15, you just stay there till you make it. The goal for a tour player is 10 or less. He did it in 6. I've never had a guy do it in 6 before. I've had plenty of guys do it in 7. I've had guys do an 8 all the time, but never do it in 6. And a guy who we've been working together for a little bit on this now, and
What's his name?
Grant Hafner.
Oh yeah.
He's at second stage right now, conservatory. But it's made a huge difference, and it's been interesting to see. He's probably the first person that I've had extended period of time working with on that, and I've become more of a fan of it because it's a pretty almost natural motion, honestly.
It is, and you're going to see a lot more of this now. And what's funny about Lab and their technology is they were kind of discovered through how good their broomsticks were. And, Lucas Glover probably was the worst putter on tour. I mean, you want to talk about like having to do something different. He just couldn't putt at all. He just yips.
I mean, he's one of my favorite people on the PGA Tour. He hits the ball so good. He won John Deere when he was putting conventional, and I think he missed 5 putts from 5 feet in, and he won the tournament.
Yeah. I mean, he was at the end. And so, Witten got this, and Lucas Glover's top 40 in the world now, and he won twice with this. Will Zalatoris, if you remember, and how what he was doing. He's went to this and he's settled the ship. You're going to see way more of these in the future, and the reason is because there's no stigma now because you got Akshay Bhatia, who's 21, 22 years old, winning on the PGA Tour with a broomstick.
Having a significant putting change going to that. Like he putted, like if you looked at his this year's putting stats versus last year's putting stats,
it's significant.
It's a big change.
Who's the other one that I'm missing? I'm just drawing a blank on the other young one that's out there with
Ben On's using it.
Ben On, he's using a Lab, and then anyway, I'll think of it.
Adam Scott.
Adam Scott was kind of the initial, right? And Adam Scott just designed their new one, and he's was kind of what he put kind of lab on the market.
I mean, he's honestly the poster child
Yeah, he
for
was, yeah.
improving your putting, going a different route.
Yeah.
Because he was really struggling, and now he's been consistently a top 50 putter
Yeah.
with that method and that putter.
Yeah. So a couple of the benefits of this. I've spent a lot of time on this, and kind of, and Wes is one of my students, and we've learned how to use this. And Wes was at a point where he's having a hard time. And what's interesting when you go to this, and I spent a lot of time with Will's coach, Josh Gregory, who's an excellent short game teacher too, is the keys for him are when he sets up, same thing, ball position, kind of left ear, little weight left. And what's kind of interesting with this is you'll see normally like little wider stances, like you'll see the foot kick out a little bit and the knee will get inside the foot.
Kind of have to, just to stabilize.
You kind of have to. Like you see the knee get a little inside the foot to kind of stabilize the lower body, which was kind of a big learning curve for me in that. But the other one is what it does, and this is where it'd be interesting to talk to Brad about the shoulders, is getting this forearm down parallel to the ground.
That I feel like has become, for fundamentals for Broomstick, that, as far as I really would say, is the only known fundamental of Broomstick.
Yeah.
Is that part right there.
You see what I'm saying? It can't be up here. Right, but if it's up here, see, this is where I get this way, right? And so you don't want to be this way with this. I mean, you just wear the bottom of the face out. So you got to be here, which gets my shoulders level, right? And I'm very upright. And obviously this is not mine; it's too short. But I can't anchor it. I gotta stabilize it here. Steve, we were working on it, and Steve's great with putting, and I kind of started fiddling with the cap with my thumb more on top like that, which kind of helped me, kind of get more here too. But there's variation in what you can do in here to help kind of stabilize up here. But once you not anchor, but get it stable there, and then this comes in, and you're very upright, and then you just learn to kind of get this thing to start back. I mean, it's like, it's a no-brainer, man. Like that putter head, like you get it swinging, and it just feels like it's just going to fall right square on top of the ball. And so I've found, for those that come in here like, man, I'm at the end, I need something different, teach me how to do this, is that when I get them in here and I get all this right, and then I kind of get them engaging this, they start feeling the putter head kind of swinging up and in, right? And it's a little easier for them to kind of get that 2-to-1 ratio too, right? It's a little, it's hard to go, like with this, because it's going to pull off. So it's a little easier.
You have to build momentum.
Right. You have to build momentum. That's exactly right.
What do you use to initiate the stroke? Once you're at address with that long putter, what initiates for you?
Well, I'll go for me. Then yeah.
Yeah, I've got a good drill for that too.
Okay, so I feel my right shoulder like almost like pivoting like this, up and back. Okay, and then that gets the putter head swinging up and in. I think one of the key dimensions here is up. I find that when people struggle and they get to that wit's end, that putter head's kind of low. They kind of get it low and in, and the finish is long. And then you get them really upright, you get them set, and then they start swinging it up and in with momentum, and then the putter head just starts to fall, and like literally is just falling right on the ball to this shorter finish, and it starts to like simplify it. But it is a learning curve. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's like there is some learning involved to get this. But that's what I feel with the shoulder. What do you feel going back?
So I don't have a towel. This is a towel wrapped around people's back. I found to be one of the best things for this style of putting.
Okay.
And it forces you, again, kind of going back to that alignment stick drill. It's just rotational. It's getting everything working together. Because what I've seen a lot with these people is their arms and body are not in sync. And so the towel naturally forces everything to kind of move together.
So where's the towel?
Wrapped around your back.
Okay.
So it would be under your armpits, wrapped around your back, so everything's kind of tucked in. You can still get this out here, but everything's just really tucked in. And what I've found with that is it cleans up the body movement. It doesn't let people, and that's a drill that I'll give for people with conventional left hand low, because it forces the hands, arms, and body to move together. I'm a big proponent of that for everyone, really. Because, I mean, there's some people that are going to be able to lag it or do whatever, outliers again. But for the most part, everything working more together and there's going to be variances on how much hand you use or whatever.
Yeah.
It's going to make things just more consistent. Again, going back to Xander's thing, I love that phrase, big muscle move.
Yeah.
And like,
Right.
hands are not a big muscle move. Like everything moving together in sync. That's one of the, I like using that phrase a lot, getting everything
Do you
in
ever hear
sync.
anybody on tour like engage their core at all?
Yeah.
You do?
I've heard guys rib cages be the rotational kind of power of the stroke. I've heard traps be kind of the thing, shoulders, chest. It's really interesting how people feel it. Going back to, and that's where it's like the towel
Yeah.
drill. It doesn't tell you what to feel.
Right.
The stick drill doesn't tell you what to feel. It's you build your feels with stuff that's giving you feedback on what should work.
Yeah.
But a towel wrapped around the back, under your armpits, for anything, whether broomstick, it's one of my favorite things for a broomstick, just because it gets everything in sync. But it's a great drill for anyone too.
All right, so before we transition to like some practice stuff, any questions on some of the technique that because we're covering some ground and we're kind of rapid and fire, different stuff for you to think about, right? And everybody's a little bit different. But any, thoughts, questions on some of this stuff?
So you mentioned one of your players goes back and forth conventional with the ball. What kind of setup things are you working with when the right arm changes position with the ball?
So it's, again, going back to trying to just get everything square, but obviously when your forearm's up here or whatever, that's going to be totally different. But it's just about making sure his hips and all of his alignments are square. Because the stroke, if I showed you just a video of the putter head, you would not know that he's putting claw or whatever. So the motion should stay very still, but it's just ultimately it's getting that in that individual setup, which for him is just making sure we're square, getting everything on top. He likes having a fatter grip when he goes claw, which makes sense just to give a place to go. Like Super Stroke actually has a specific claw grip.
Wow.
I didn't know if you knew that. I found that out this year. It fits great. I mean, it's kind of funny what they're doing now, but that would be just the main thing. Making sure, again, we're all square. For the most part, whatever putting style you use, the same fundamentals apply. And I think it's just getting those to fit into the style that you are using.
Look, I don't want to say it's okay to change. Like, you shouldn't be like, today I'm going to putt this way, and today I'm going to putt this way, and but you do get to a point where it's okay. Maybe I need some help. You go through a lesson maybe, and there's some things in there that okay, hands are active, and I've kind of hit the bottom mentally, and like there is a time where like, hey, maybe I should try a different type of grip.
Yeah, could you actually pull up Lee's videos real quick? This kind of plays right into that. So he's one of the guys, so these are the two styles we're putting with, and like, it's not, I don't love people changing at all. Like if we can stay in the same thing, that's what we're gonna do. But like Travis said, there are times where you just have, go to that face on, one to the left right there, where you just have to change things. So this was the tournament right after he won. So this is obviously when he was playing great. This was about a 6-month stretch where he was gaining half a shot around on tour, which is usually top 10. So he did 6 months where he was putting conventional, and then off season came. He putted good he played a couple fall events, but took the rest of the season off. This season rolled around. Stroke looked great, but nothing was going in. For the first, started in Maui, didn't putt great. Last day he putted good, but like nothing went in. This trend continued, and then we had to make a change at Honda this year. And he putts great at Honda. It's just interesting, but like, I'm a big proponent of people doing the same thing over and over again. And he putted like a top 10 putter in the world for a 6-month stretch, and we had to change it just because it was starting to eat at him mentally, and if like it's just going to destroy all confidence if you don't make some kind of a change.
Yeah, mentally, I think that's the threshold, right? You get to that point of, okay, I'm lost complete confidence. I need a new chapter completely. Something's got to be different. And then from there, you kind of build that, and then maybe you come back to this at some point. But I think it's okay when you get to that point.
You have to sometimes.
There was
Yeah, so it's kind of funny we were talking about this. I've tried every grip, every putter. I've done broomstick, arm lock, you name it, left hand low, all this stuff. And what's kind of funny is I used to always think that we were talking about this earlier. I used to think that my left miss was because I was too active with my hands. And so I'm trying all these different grips, arm lock, broomstick. I went everywhere. And it wasn't until I specifically, you were talking about putting coaches and stuff. So until I got the CAPTA device and took a specific putting lesson, that I realized it had nothing to do with my grip, had nothing to do with the putter, it's strictly path. And so I think identifying the problem first
Yep.
before you fix something
No,
is more important.
no, absolutely. And this is something I see. So online lessons are obviously where I started. And with online lessons, most of the time I have no background on the individual that's sending in a video. So I ask for specific parameters, stuff I want to see or stuff I want to know what they have. But a lot of the times I'm just going in with their opinion of what's going on a lot of the time. And a very, very, very strong majority they are wrong. So it kind of goes back to you got to know the problem, what the problem is to be able to solve it. And that's kind of a key factor as well.
Just watch more YouTube videos, right?
Well, that's the thing. Like, I'm big on social media,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I can't tell you. I mean, I've kind of died down a little bit on social media using it.
Yeah.
There's so much, just not necessarily horrible information, but not good information. And Instagram can't determine good or bad
Yeah.
golf information. They can determine a quality made video.
Yeah.
It could be the best production video, but the worst information in that video is going to get 10 million views versus a decent production and incredible information could get 0 views. But that one's going to be, oh, this is the trend that's going around the internet right now, or
Go
whatever.
ahead, Terry.
How do I know how far from the ball I should stand?
So that kind of goes back to eye position a little bit, and a little bit of, if you're in a good spot, kind of again checking the shoulder line, where if you're too far, like Travis was talking about it earlier, if you're too far away from anything, like my shoulders are going to be way out here, this line's going to be messed up. If you're too close, it's going to be way back here. So it's kind of finding that balance point with your feet, which I like. That has been something I've found to be really successful with students, is when you're in your posture from a down the line video, just draw a line directly from where your armpits are and see where that falls. I really like seeing it fall more right around here for people. And that means you're pretty much in a good spot, and you're not going to be too far from it. You're not going to be too close. You're really balanced in that point.
Use a mirror. Stand,
Yeah.
use a mirror and try to get your armpit to be right on top of that spot. Yep.
Have you ever worked with anyone that doesn't do a practice putt?
Like stroke?
Stroke
Yeah.
before they actually-
And that's kind of going into the routine. Like, that's super individual. I have no issue with people doing that. My whole thing with the routine or anything like that is there needs to be a purpose to it, because there's people who do practice strokes on tour, and I'm like, what are you doing? That's awful. It's like they're doing short stroke for a 50-footer. I'd rather someone do no practice stroke and have an intention better than whatever that was for someone. But I have no issue with no practice stroke. I honestly think for some people it really frees them up, as opposed to kind of they almost get overthinking it, because there are different people. We all think differently. Our brains are all kind of process things differently. What's up? Yeah, he's no practice strokes. He just, like he said, he really likes to feel like he's getting
Aaron
into
Badley.
the putt. Aaron Badley. A lot of good putters don't.
Badly can putt. I mean, he's. Yeah. Oh, sorry, coach. Go, Zerba, you go first. Then coach.
Okay. You mentioned at the beginning that depending on the body type of the person, there's variances. So for example, for women, the big chest, like the bigger chest, does it change the way, because it's in the way?
A little bit, yeah. Like that drill, I haven't been able to do with some people before, because obviously for different reasons. So it's kind of like finding, like that would be more of a towel drill or something to find, like it's finding different variations of stuff to make it work. But yeah, absolutely. Like people's bodies are going to determine what they can and can't do. And I think,
Towel drill would be good.
yeah, that's where golf instruction in general, I think, is getting way better at, is suiting it more to the individual person versus like any sort of technique.
Yeah.
Like it has to be this way. It's like, no, it has to be that way for that person, but it can be a bunch of different ways for any individual.
Yeah, I like the 3 drills to kind of help. What do you feel? The context. It's a little different than full swing, because full swing is more dynamic, and it's the movement just so much bigger, right? And so it's like you can't just say, hey, do one of these 3 and like, what do you feel? There's more pieces to put together, and the story's more complex, right?
Well,
And
I
there's
like how you put that too. It's feel. I ask people
Yeah.
all the time, what are you feeling here?
Yeah.
Because like when I've known my guys are going to putt well is when I physically see a video of them and I'm like, that looks really good. And to them, it feels really good. when my eyes match up with what they're feeling, I've pretty much had success every time with guys I know they're going to putt well. But like when it looks good to me but feels bad to them, I wouldn't know, but it feels horrible internally, and they don't putt well.
Coach.
Arms connected to your body. How do you feel the arms almost similar to what she's talking about? But what is my feeling connection?
So that's a great example. So this is where the towel drills are great for working on it, but I don't expect you to have to tuck them in. Like Kevin Na would probably be the one example of a guy who's got his arms really out. And to me, it just goes back to whatever you start with, you need to maintain. And as long as you're not like in a weird spot or anything like that, like let's just say, assume the person's actually pretty squared up and their arms are out here or whatever, this just needs to maintain that. So this needs to stay wide. But like connection's going to be different for each person. Body type plays a little bit of a factor into it, an individual stroke setup. But for the most part, it's just wherever you are at address, you just need to maintain that same thing throughout the stroke. Like I'm big on keeping, like you were saying earlier, just keeping the levels, keeping angles together, not really letting things change.
I would elaborate on that just for a second with Coach. There is that like the difference between having your elbows out and your elbows tucked in.
What does it the hands?
Yeah. So I found that when you grip it, your elbows, kind of a little bit this way, almost like palms towards the sky. And your wrists in a little bit of what we call ulnar deviation, where you feel a little more of this down. All right, so it's like tucked down versus out and here. Do you agree? Like in general.
In general, we definitely
more
would probably be
here
more
and here.
You'd
right?
want to be more in.
Yeah.
You're going to see more better putters be in, but there are people on top.
There are, yep.
It's just again, but wherever you start, to me, it's just you need to maintain.
You
that.
think
But
about if I'm
for
here,
an
like my
average
shoulders,
golfer,
going to want to turn. If I'm out here,
it's harder.
It's harder. So they want to work a little more up and down. So, before we get to, and real quick on that note, okay, and this grip, and it's interesting. Like he's out there working with, he worked with a lot of amateurs too, but you're looking at 0.001% of the golf population, 35 weeks a year. I mean, these guys can know how to roll it, right? And women. So, and for me, like in here, and the masses coming in here, and you see the general issues of the path and the face. To me, this grip right here helps so many people, and it's not just the left hand; it's the right. And some of you who have helped you with your putting, that right hand you'll notice is kind of to the side. And is it almost kind of on that knuckle down in there a little bit?
Oh, we look at it almost like opposing palms,
Yeah.
Like people have talked about that. Like if you're on the grip, like however they are, like this or whatever, it kind of helps everything stay together. If they're kind of like too weird, you're going to kind of manipulate it. But if they're opposing, they're just going to want to do this together. And that's why that grip is really good.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like you see his hand kind of down in here. Like it's almost like this lifeline is kind of on that knuckle down in there. And what I see a lot that comes through the studio, I see a pretty good left hand, but I see this hand on top, like that. I see that right hand climb like that, and that forearm gets tall.
So sit up to that real quick. Right, exactly like that. So with that high elbow, all you got to do pretty much for someone like that is just tuck that elbow, and that instantly does that.
And that grip underneath helps that a little bit.
So it's kind of funny we were talking about that. Lee's issue is that right arm gets high. So in his routine, he tucks that thing every time to walk into it to make sure it doesn't get high.
I fix a lot of right hand putting grips.
Right hand causes a lot of trouble.
A lot of trail hands. There's right hands in here that I've went in there and slapped that thing down underneath, right? Get it under, not on top, under. Soften the elbow, right? A little unhinge the wrist a bit, and all of a sudden, things kind of look a little more symmetrical in line.
One of the things that I think has made a big difference for an average golfer is feeling like you hit draws with the putter. This is one of the things that kind of blows people's mind a little bit. Because people feel like if they hit a draw with the putter, the ball's just going to start so far right.
Yeah.
And this kind of goes into, what do you guys think, what percentage of start line is determined by face angle? It's about 93. So if you really look at it in depth, like path is relatively irrelevant. based on if you can manage the face with that path. Because everything is based off where that face is aimed at impact, that ball is going to start. It's, as you get into longer putts, it kind of goes down to 90, but 90% of it on a 40-footer is determined by where that face is at impact. And that goes into having a decent path makes it easier, but face ultimately is king.
All right, so we're going to transition to some practice here, and we're going to kind of finish up and then and some more questions too. So though, we kind of spent some time there on the stroke and the setup, the strokes, and how it works and different variations. Transition to some practice stuff, but before we get into some of your favorite practice drills and techniques that you use, I want to set the stage with expectations of putting, because I think this is always an interesting one of what do the best putters in the world make from certain distances, two putts, etc. So take it from here.
So this to preface these numbers too, these are the best players in the world on some of the best conditions in the world. So 8 feet is typically 50%. It's not on this chart exactly, but if the best players in the world on the best greens are 8 feet, 50%, what is an average golfer on average greens going to be? It's going to be way less. And people's minds get a little skewed because when you're watching a golf telecast, what do you see? You see everyone making putts. You don't see guys missing 7-footers, 4-footers because they don't show that. So you kind of get a false narrative that every tour player makes every putt all the time. But I mean, I've traveled to 123 tour events now, and I've seen guys shoot 80-80 missed cuts. I've seen guys win golf tournaments, and it's not the most fun life all the time when you're riding the highs and the lows. There's, like, golf, as you guys know, is more low than high. And so it's an interesting perspective when you kind of see it up close of how much people not having success versus when you're watching it on TV. It seems like everyone's having a great time and playing well, but when you just don't see those guys that have missed 4 cuts in a row and nothing's feeling good, this is what kind of goes back to where it's keeping everything in perspective here. So think about it. If what's this threshold? It gets to about 1 putt, 2 putts, 8 feet. And so anything outside of that, I like to tell kind of any average golfer, like pretty much 15 feet and out, whole thing you should focus on is good speed. Because if you have good speed, that's going to increase your make chances and it's going to limit your 3-putt chances. And then as you get better at reading greens, you're going to make more putts in general. But even for tour players, good speed is kind of the ultimate thing and what's going to make every one of these numbers better. But I can't tell you how many times I've quizzed people when I've come in for lessons. I'm like, what do you think an average 8-footer is on tour? And they'll hear 75% or something. That's about maybe, I don't even know if anyone leads at 75% for 8 feet. So it's just keeping things in perspective. And I mean, I'll say it to guys on tour when guys are going through struggles to kind of, again, try and keep it in perspective. 15 feet's around 20%. So a tour player is going to make 2 out of 10. So if you hit it to the first 10 holes, if you hit it to 15 feet on a tour event and you made 2, you'd be 0 strokes gained putting. But you'd feel like you missed everything. And that's kind of another good thing is how many putts do you think are made in a PGA Tour event? What's the average putts made over 25 feet per tour player? Per tournament.
25 feet?
Over 25 feet. Any individual player. For a tournament? Any other guesses?
25 feet?
25, over any putt over 25 feet.
Over 4 rounds.
For 4 rounds, yes.
I'll say 7.
1.5. They go 55 holes before they're expected to make a putt over 25 feet. It's, wow. So I've talking about how golf's changed, money's coming to golf. There's $1 million payrolls on tour for players. There's players have outrageous payrolls for the staff that they have. And a lot of it, stats guys are a big thing on tour. So I've kind of gotten to know a couple of the stats guys, and it's really interesting. Anyone that has led the 25-plus category, Jordan Spieth, 2015, 2017, where do you think the average finish position is for them next year? So like the guy who led 25-plus feet, what do you think their average finish position is in that category next year?
50.
Not 78 or something.
That was my next guess, 70.
It's relatively lucky to make putts long at an elite clip. You just, no one does it back to back to back. You can have years that are individually good, And you could hit great putts and they just don't go in. You can hit bad putts that do go in. And it's really kind of going back to keeping things in perspective.
Yep.
A tour player is going to make 1.5 putts a tournament over 25 feet.
That's a mind boggler, really, and expectation of, man, I need to make more putts. I can send, whoever wants this, I can text it to you. Because it really is keeping the expectation level in check, right? And these are best putters in the world, perfect surfaces. Now, what this doesn't tell you is how much break, downhill, uphill. So, okay. So if it was a perfect uphill putt, slightly uphill, very little break, okay, yes, I think this would improve a little bit, right? So every putt's a little bit different.
Yeah.
But I do think it does, okay, wait a minute. It kind of allows you to exhale just a little bit in that, all right, 10 feet, best putters in the world making 38%. All right. I made 2 today. Feel pretty good. You should be like, dang, I did all. I know. It just doesn't even make sense.
And then it kind of shows you how important proximity is.
Yeah.
How close people hit it matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then on top, and that's where a guy like Scotty who hits it so well, he doesn't get punished for hitting it well, but it's harder for him to be around 0 strokes gained putting, because if Scotty gained like Denny McCarthy, he would win tournaments by 10. Mm-hmm. So Scotty's just going to have more putts from 8 to 15 feet, and those are also more penal if you miss them, strokes gained wise.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean he's a bad putter. It's
Right.
it's kind of all relative.
Skewed a little bit.
I've seen it too, guys that drive the ball really well on tour, strokes gained approach is tougher because they're in a better spot coming into the green. So if they don't hit a good shot, as compared to someone who had an 8-iron and they have a pitching wedge, they're going to not gain as many strokes, even though they might hit it to the same distance as the guy who hit the 8-iron.
The one that really jumps out to me is 30, 40 feet, 2-putt, 88%. That's a big number. I mean, you want to talk about distance control from 30, 40 feet. You're 2-putting 9 out of 10. I mean, that's pretty stellar, right? And so you start looking at opportunities. I mean, it's fascinating. I'm glad we put this up there to see it, and I want to kind of transition now to some practice. And as he's going through this, feel free to ask more questions. But distance control, okay, practice. Your favorite 1 or 2 things that you like to do for guys and women out there. Do these while I'm not there for touch and distance control.
So I'll kind of just set up a mini one in here, actually. It'll be kind of easier to show you guys. So you'll see a lot of people doing this now. Those flat marks that they've had at golf courses forever, you're starting to see kind of people put these out. So these are great for speed drills. So one of the very common ones we'll do is I'll kind of try and mimic it here a little bit, shorten it out. But we're doing a ladder speed drill here. So we got to go into each slot each time. I'm shortening it up, obviously, just for space.
One foot each.
It would be 2 each normally.
Okay.
So this is exactly what we'd do. So we'd have that, and then we'll just call this. So this drill normally would be 30 feet from this to the first mark, 40 feet to the last mark. So you'd have 2 feet in between. So what we're doing on this, and again, anyone can do this drill.
So 30, 40.
Is you got to get it in the first slot. And then the way I do it's kind of it's a leapfrog drill, but you have 2 chances to get it in this. And then if you don't, obviously if you're here, just keep going. But if you get it in here, got 2 chances in here. If you get it in, you go. If 2 chances later, you go back a spot. So it's putting's version of a towel drill, kind of hitting a towel at 50, 60, 70, 80 yards. Because it's just building touch. It's building feel, building speed control. I love this drill for people.
Really?
I think this is one of the, this is a very similar, decade Scott Fawcett. They're all very similar drills. And
So
it's just
you're
something
you're going 30 feet to there. So that seems like tight quarters for
it'd be 2 feet.
for you and I. I mean, and the rest of us, could you stretch those out a little bit?
Yeah, we absolutely could.
yeah.
And the other way to do it would be not have individual slots. That was kind of more of a tour drill, I guess.
Yeah.
So the other way, this is kind of a Cameron McCormick drill actually, is to take the way this is, so again, 30, 40 feet, and you got to get 5 balls just progressively past each other in this time. So that's kind of the probably easier way to do it, because we kind of wanted to get it a little more specific. But yeah, so it's just first ball will go here. You got to get the next one here, then here, here, here. You got to do it 5 times
Within
10 feet.
So in theory, you could do that like
We've had
from 20 to 30 too, like
exactly 10 to
Yeah.
20. Like
Yeah.
guys shorten it up
Sure.
a little bit from that distance, but yeah, it's just building that feel. And I like people doing that with the metronome in their ear. Again, just building that timing back.
uphill and then downhill.
Yep, about 1% is typically what we'd like
yeah.
to do. But then the other speed drill, this is one I like. I call this the baseball drill. So we'll just set this up. So if this mark right here is the hole. Put this thing 2 feet past it. So you'd set a tee at 5, 15, and 30 feet. And so the whole point of this drill is the ball just needs to get to the hole, but it can't hit that stick.
So that sticks behind the hole.
Yeah, so that stick's 2 feet behind the hole.
All right, I got you.
And then you would just kind of go back. You get 3 strikes before you'd have to start the drill over. So you go 3, 3, 5, 15, 30. You go 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. If you get 3 strikes, you start the drill over.
Yeah.
That one's actually not that bad.
Okay. 5, 10, 15, 3,
Or
3,
5,
3.
15, 30.
Oh, 5, 15. Okay. And a strike would be short or pass.
Or hitting the stick, yeah. As long as, and again, just going back to just building speed control.
Yeah.
And on that last drill, the little ladder drill, that's the big thing. Kind of perspective is a huge thing.
Yeah.
I can't tell you, like, when we have these things set out and I'm working with tour guys, they get a little frustrated if they can't finish this drill. But I'm like, dude, how often would you be mad on a 40-footer if you left it a foot short? Yeah, you'd love to have hit it a foot harder,
Sure.
but you're not going to be mad that you're tapping in a 40-footer. And, like, you got to keep things in perspective a lot of the time when you're practicing.
At what length would you say, and over players there, at what length would you say a player is not trying to make it? They're just like,
I think you might have been out. I said for the average golfer, once you get to like 15 feet, speed control is your only thought.
okay. Wow.
And
Okay,
I think
15 feet.
even on tour, like obviously they're more advanced, but like once you get to 20 feet, we want speed's more important. The line matters, but we want good speed. Because if you have, the way I look at good putting, if you have really good speed control and you're a pretty decent green reader, you're going to give yourself a really good chance to make a lot of putts. Because some days you're really going to line it up with your greens and your speed. But if you have good speed, you're never going to be too far off. And all it takes is just getting on slightly the right line and you're going to give yourself a chance.
I cannot think of the other guy. I've been trying to think of it the last 15 minutes. The other broomstick. Question on distance control.
Quick question about that, because I know you were talking about a lot about feel. Like Bryson, one of the things he talks about is he's obviously super mechanical, and he's got a formula, and he takes it back. Basically, if he's going to hit a 20-foot putt, he's like, okay, that, obviously it's different with green speed. He's like, okay, I go back 18 inches, and so this kind of goes back, and then he has his follow through. So, would you advocate a mechanical method like that to develop the feel, but when you're playing, you go back to the feel, or when you're on the course, it kind of goes back to, well, what are you focusing on? Are you focusing on your distance, your start line, or the actual stroke? What is it that you look at?
So that's a great question. First off, I actually think that a lot of people could take something from what he does, not to necessarily the degree that he does it, but using this just as an example. So Phil Kenyon created it's a Vizio tempo stick. And so it's essentially just a light bar that has like a metronome beat in it, and it shows you, so you enter, the screens are rolling 10, I've got a 30-footer, and it's 1 degree uphill, and it'll tell you exactly how far you should take it back. And I don't think you necessarily need to go that in depth, but I think marking down, like, okay, a 10-footer goes to here, a 20-footer goes to here, a 30-footer goes to here, and basing that off of your stance. So like if I'm right here, I'm going to take a 10-footer, so the putter gets to inside right here, 20-footer goes to right here, a 30-footer goes to there. I think that's a good reference point for people. Again, I don't want anyone, when they're actually over the putt, to be like, it needs to go right here. Yeah. But just having that in your head, okay, I have a 30-footer, it needs to get outside my right foot. Having like an example of that for people is really helpful. Mm-hmm. So I think that kind of structure, and that's a massively simplified version of what Bryson does, but I think is really helpful for people.
What's that stick called?
What?
Kenyon's?
The Vizio Tempo Stick.
Vizio Tempo Stick.
It's. I mean, I bought it and we've been using it with Lee. It's unbelievable. Like the math
Good?
that they had to do
Yeah.
to be able to figure it out is pretty incredible. I told him about it. And he's
Well,
like,
that guy's done it too, Steve. He's shown me the math. I mean,
It's-
and it's Bryson type of math.
and it's. I mean, every time if we wanted to go 31 feet on
Yeah.
a 2% uphill rolling
Yeah.
10, and you actually match it,
Yeah.
it goes 31 feet. It's
Wow.
wild.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. I'm gonna get the stick. That sounds really cool.
I think it's great as a teacher to show people. They're kind of like $750.
Okay, I'm not gonna get one.
They're a little expensive, but they're very worth it. Like the visual side
Phil's
of
not
it
giving me a discount
as
either.
a coach is I think been very beneficial for people to see like, oh wow, like a 30-footer goes that far back.
Yeah.
It's just kind of again eye opener.
I was using a metal
Ruler.
yards
Yeah.
with different colored electrical tape.
Yeah.
around it for that same.
Yeah, I like that. Again, just building baselines. And again, I don't want anyone to get too caught up when they're out. You still need to be an athlete. We got to make putts. But I think as a baseline, it's like, okay, I got a 30-footer. This in your practice strokes, you're more aware of it than anything. If you're doing practice strokes, okay, just get it out here. And that kind of naturally will bleed in.
So I know this probably isn't a tour player question, but for your amateurs that you're working with, what strategies for putting off the green? What are you considering?
I think one of the big things, and I tell this to guys on tour all the time, loft matters. Like I will have guys on tour move the shaft back actually. Again, this is depending on the situation itself, but I think this is definitely an issue I see guys either have not enough loft, like they're actually de-lofting it, and if you're putting off of a green and you're doing that, you have no chance. So the only thing I would say for that is just to be really aware of where the loft is on the putter. Because, I mean, I've had guys where if they're putting up these, we have big sides that we're putting up for the week, move that handle a little back because it's just going to launch the ball a little higher. It's going to get on the grass. Because that's the other thing. Going back to agronomy's changed so much that you had to launch the ball higher when the greens rolled more or greens rolled slower. And as greens get faster, you don't have to launch it as high. So if you're rolling, I mean, if there's greens that legitimately roll 16, I honestly don't know if you would need to launch it in the air because they're so fine. But greens that roll 8, you have to launch it more. Like there's players like Jason Day who have traveled with multiple putters, different lofts. They'll switch lofts based on the week. And it's really interesting, but that would be the main thing for that is just being aware of the loft you're presenting for putting, because if you start driving it into the grass, you've got no chance. And I've seen a big significant change in people where they just get a little more loft on it and it gets the ball rolling on top of the grass.
Yeah, that's interesting. Especially uphill.
Yep. Like the big ones are when you're putting up big slopes.
Yeah.
If you do that,
Especially uphill, it makes a lot of sense. Not driving it.
because like I've got a really good video of Tiger actually. He's putting on an upslope on a fringe, and he drives the ball straight into it. Mm-hmm. And it's just like you can see it, it's like a slow-mo video. Just straight pops up, and it's like that ball probably was 15 feet short of where he
Yeah.
ended.
Hey, that also works for when you're going up grade, or especially I notice it on the collars, not on the green surface, but when you're in an apron or something and you're putting into the grain and it's really,
Yeah.
like you have to add a little loft to your address position. You have to lean that putter shaft back and add loft to the putter to get it through that apron onto the green.
That's where the hybrid could help. That's where the hybrid helps, though, right?
Yeah. So it's funny you mentioned that. So Phil, when he won the PGA, Phil had been working with Xander's putting coach, who's a big Quintic guy. Quintic's big on launch conditions for putter. And so Phil, I can't remember the exact scenario, but he went with a different grip and he referenced launch specifically. He's like, I launch it higher when I do this, and this putt required a more specific launch. And that was when he won the PGA at Key West.
Yep.
And it was, I mean, these guys are very aware of every aspect of what they're doing.
Someone have their hand up on a question there? What's the most common drill you see out there? Like, is it the gate drill?
Like some sort of start line drill
Yeah.
to kind of start, and then you're really starting to see a big shift in just people working on speed.
Just speed.
And like green reading in general is becoming, like speed and green reading are becoming two things that you're starting to see people work on way more. Like digital levels are something every player has in their bag, whether they use aim point or any sort of green reading system. Everyone has one. And that's becoming a big thing. Green reading specifically, I feel like is taking a front seat now.
So would you say it's not so much like go to a 6-foot putt straight up the hill, dead straight, and hit putts? It's no, go 12 to 20 feet, 2 balls right to left, 2 balls downhill, 2 balls left to right, read the green, match the speed.
I think there's room. Like I would want what you said. I would want people to start on that 6-foot straight putt. Like you get your baseline, you get into your setup every day. Like Jimmy Stanger is one of the best people I've seen with it, where he knows exactly how far because he's got it marked out. He's like 2 putters from the ball, so he sets a tee down here. He knows exactly where his foot goes. He's got 1 ball inside from his foot, so he's getting in the same setup, and that's kind of what that would be used for. You're calibrating your setup that day. You're trying to get back into the same feels, and then you go into more specific practice.
I have a question about green reading in general. So,
Oh boy, we need another hour. There we go.
this problem every single time when I go. So obviously, like you're walking up to the putt. Obviously, part of green reading is as you approach a green, you're looking at the terrain, you're looking at the whole thing, you get a general idea of the slope, and you see your ball, and you're saying, okay, I know in general this goes. I can't tell you how many times this happens. I'll go and I'll look at the putt, and I'll say, okay, this putt, I'm looking at it. Let's say I'm behind the ball, looking towards the hole, and I look at it and I go, okay, let's just not even left to right, just uphill, downhill. I look at it and go, this putt's a little bit uphill. I walk to the other side of the hole and look at it and go, oh, this putt's way downhill. So do you find reading uphill and downhill is better from the side?
It's a good question.
Or like, well, because I freak myself out half the time and I go back and look at it and I'm like, oh, I wasn't even close to it.
I'm a big believer. Stockton had this written in his book. You read greens like you're reading a book. You would never read a book from above. You'll read it from, I'm fine with either side, because you always want to be below the slope. You always want to be looking up the slope. Never really want to be looking down. You can't really see anything if you're looking down the slope. And then something that I'm a big proponent of this, and anyone can do this. You don't even need anything. But people using their feet, to me, just learning, okay, I know this is left. I know this is right. That alone, because you can do that for uphill, downhill as well. That alone is a massive green reading skill that I tell all my students to do, whether they use aim point or any sort of green reading system. I'm like, if you have a 5-footer and you're kind of questioning which way that's going, if you're pretty solid knowing right, left with just your feet, you've got a lot more confidence to hit that putt if you just have that sort of feedback. But that would be something, a general tip for green reading would be learn to use your feet.
Evaluate the holes, you're saying you should look from the side to
I personally, like, if that's the hole, if that middle thing's the hole, I'm going to look at it from both sides, and then, assuming this is the slope, I'm going to look at it from down here.
Looking up. Always try to look up. You're looking up the slope as much as you can. Not down. Aerial looking down, you can't see anything.
You definitely don't. Like, that's what's so funny. Like, again, just anyone could buy a digital level, go to a putting green, and start to learn how to feel slope.
Yeah.
And that, to me, like, that's the basis of green reading, is like, which way is it going? If you know that, then it's way easier to start to determine how much. If you know, okay, this is hard right to left. Like, one of the greatest things is Tim Tucker invented this thing called True Aim Marker. Travis knows all about it. I think for the average golfer, it's one of the best things for them. So it's a green reading marker. I'm pretty sure the numbers came from Putt View, like their actual break. And it's a marker where it has 4 lines on each side and 1 middle line. So you line the middle line up to the hole, and then based off of what you think, 1, 2, 3, or 4, you kind of pick and you line your ball up off of that. And it's unbelievably accurate.
Is that legal?
It is.
Yeah.
I have one.
Yeah.
You got no, I don't think anyone's using it on tour, but it is
Yeah.
legal. The only downside to it is
no, it's legal.
is
Yeah.
squaring, is
Yeah.
getting the middle line. So you have to get the middle line to the middle of the hole. And once you do that, then every other line mathematically lines up. You just have to, again, determine which way it's going.
Yeah. How many use their feet? I mean, yeah. Some people can't feel it in their feet, so they use their eyes. And I think what's interesting between the eyes and the feet is that my eyes, if I'm looking from up, if I'm looking from the bottom and up, like I can see obvious break, right? And so like, oh yeah, this is right to left. I mean, you can see obvious, or like what you would consider, like they measure it in percents. So like a 1% is a subtle break, 2%, all right, a little bigger, 3%, this is, you know, you can see 2s and 3s. 1s are a little harder, you know, like some people can see it and some can't. And so where I find the feet are helpful is 1% in, you know, and one thing you can do now is you can straddle the line. You know, you can straddle the line and ask yourself, is my right foot higher than my left? Is my left foot higher than my right? Yeah, a little bit, you know, like, yeah. And here's what I would say to that. Don't be afraid to be wrong, okay? Because the one thing that aim point is, and a lot of people, I think aim point has been a brilliant, brilliant thing for golf instruction. And it really helped level out why a putt breaks. Now you can, you know, this stuff, like, that's for another day. We need 2 or 3 more hours on what all this is about. But you can learn it, and it's mathematics. And so using your feet and saying, all right, my right foot's higher than my left. All right, so it's 6 feet. I'm gonna play it right edge and hit it. And I hit it right edge and it broke in, perfect. Or I hit it and it's right edge and it didn't break. So my feet were wrong, right? And so it's like, okay, so let me just take that into the memory bank and then do it again. And you do kind of start, if you're willing to go through it, you'll make mistakes, but don't be deflated. Just, what did I miss? Like, you know, if you made a bad putt, you made a bad putt, right? Then you got to throw it out. Like, I just pushed it. That, it doesn't matter what I read, I made a bad stroke. But what I have found is that, okay, yeah, I don't feel anything. I'm playing straight. Wow, it broke that way. What did I miss? You know, what did I?
That's how you'll learn.
That's how you learn. What did I miss? Oh, yeah, okay, maybe, okay, maybe. There's a little there. Okay, in the memory bank, right? So look, 10 feet, you start the 15 footer, you said, inside, say, let's say 12 in for us, we're gonna make it. Just try it. Just like, all right, make a decision, hit it.
And one of the simplest views of slope that I've heard, which honestly it isn't wrong, is ask yourself, is it flat or steep? And then, is it really flat or just kind of flat? Is it really steep or just kind of steep? 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
And that was Tim Tucker thing, and it's honestly not a bad idea. Again, just
It's not.
is
No.
it flat or steep? That's pretty flat. Is it really flat? No. So it's a 2.
It's what he's doing with that thing is he's saying the first line's a 1, the second line's a 2, the third line's a 3, and it's progressively more break. And what he's saying is, okay, what do you feel? Okay, this is a 1 to me. This means a 1 to me. I'm going to aim it there. What did I learn? I got it right, you know, or I missed it, or I read it wrong, but I'm going to learn from that. And so when I pick 1 the next time, I've got that in my memory bank, or 2. So you kind of learn to calibrate. Look, it takes time. I mean, I'm not going to say this is learned overnight, but it is a way, in a very effective way,
And
to
that's
calibrate your
where,
feet.
in terms of greenery in general, it doesn't matter how you do it, a process is necessary. Like Travis just said, if you don't have a process, how are you going to learn from that? If you don't know what you're doing consistently each time, you're going to just go in circles and drive yourself crazy.
And that's what aim point, I think, taught the industry, is that, at least taught me, is that, okay, I read a putt and I missed it, like, I have no idea what I just broke more than I thought, you know, and you're like, you just kind of go to the next one and there's no answer, you know? And so when you go through aim point and you learn all of the math, you start to say, okay, I misread it and here's why, okay? But where it really is effective is it has to be you. Like, it's the calibration of, okay, I aimed here based off of what I felt in my feet. It's a 1, I hit it and it broke more. Okay, it's actually closer to a 2. So I feel it again, okay, that's a 2. That's what it feels like. That's what a 2 feels like. You know, and then as you build up that memory bank, pretty soon, like, you get pretty good at it. Like, you're like, no, it's a 1, trust me. Like, I've been through this, you know, like I've picked 2 and it didn't break, you know, or I've played it straight and it's a 1. And you do get much better, but the way you get better is through error. And that's where aim point is super, super good because it brings you back to what did you miss. And usually it's the misread, you got to get the slope direction right. Like we get that, right? And where aim point's good is from the 1% in, and missing the 1%. Like, I can't see it, but is something there?
And if you
know
get
how many
good
times
at-
you've been there, like there's got, and you're like, I don't even see. No, there's nothing there. And then you hit it, I got it right.
If you get good at the 1%, everything else is easier too. 'Cause
Right.
The 1% is the hardest thing to feel.
It's the hardest
So
thing.
if you can feel 1%,
Yeah.
you can feel anything over that.
Yeah. And then you start, okay, 2%. So where you learn is 1 to 2 to 3. And you learn the severity of the slope. That's what it is, right? So it's slope direction, and then it's the severity. So how steep is the slope? Is it 2? Is it 3? And so the more severe, the more it breaks. And so that line's going to tell you to aim more right? And so you learn how to climb that ladder 1 to 2 to 3 and make decisions based off of that. And it's pretty fascinating. It really is. And going through it and just being able to, just willing to be wrong and like, okay, what did I learn? Okay, I got it. Go to the next one.
Yeah.
You build it up and you get really good at it. And that's what these guys are doing. When you see them, when they're going like this, that's what they're doing.
And it's funny, like how good some of these guys are at it, because these
Yeah.
things go to like 1.78, and they're guessing 1.63, 1.69, or like, and I've had guys that have gotten it spot on,
Wow.
and it's just again from the continuation of them doing it and process of checking it. That's the easiest thing, in my opinion, to do is just buy a digital level, and you just go on any green, feels like a 1, and it's a 1.5.
Yeah.
And that's going to help anyone's green reading a ton.
I'm getting a green in here that has some slope to it. It's a thing you can pump up, and so we can start teaching that. And so you can go 1%, 2%, 3%, and so you can start calibrating your feet in here based off of what it feels like to you, because what it feels like to me could be different to you, right? And so you have to learn what that is for you, 1, 2, and 3, and it is helpful. I mean, once you kind of go once you kind of get it, then you're like, all right, you start making decisions based off of actual math of slope direction and severity of slope. Now, the last thing I'll say before the question is the faster the green, the more it's going to break too. That's the other factor. Okay, so the faster the putt, the more it's going to take the break. So some theories here, real quick. Generally speaking, downhill putts, we don't play enough break for 2 reasons. One, we're looking downhill, so we don't see enough break unless we're going around and looking at it or using aim point. Or 2, it's a faster putt. So, downhill putts in general, we don't usually play enough break. And that's very, very, very common. I'm not saying everybody here does that, but I'm saying everybody in here is not playing enough break downhill, right? So that's like, it's just a very common thing.
Yep.
And so I always kind of say, like, get to the, when you're reading and it's downhill, like, okay, it's a 1. You know what? I might even just kind of go 1.5 downhill. Uphill, go 1.
Like Tor reads another green reading system, and we've generalized uphill, downhill as downhill you are adding 10% of whatever you're playing, and then uphill you're taking 10% off.
Oh, really?
That's because that's even in their guidelines. Is we've generalized it a little more than
10%.
theirs, but we go 10%. So, but if you think about it, like 3 inches or just 30 inches start making a big difference. Or when you get into big breaking putts, when you have like 70 inches, 10 inches or 10% makes a big difference.
I have one of those things back there before, if you want to see it. I have one of those things. It's really, it's very cool. Tim Tucker's a smart man. He caddied for Bryson. Obviously very patient too. But he's a great guy, very, very smart, and was very much in part of that. Mark Sweeney was aim point, but Tucker was.
Tim was one of the first master teachers of aim
Tim
point.
was right there in the infancy stages, and then he kind of took the math and did some other things. And
That's actually how Bryson and Tim got connected. Was Tim taught Bryson aim point originally, and then their brains were very similar in that mathematic world.
Yep.
So.
Simple question. Does fashion and shoes affect that field? Because you have the spikes, you have the flat surface. I mean, all this.
It absolutely does, and like like if you have different shoes on, like especially if they're different heels, different like spiked versus non-spiked, you're gonna feel differently in your feet, and that's why like a lot of these guys like staying in the same style shoe for that reason.
Yeah.
And like even putting practice for guys on tour, I really ask them to just the same height of shoe, because I don't always want them to. They don't need to necessarily putt in golf shoes, but I don't want you to putt in running shoes that are really tall or other things that are just going to put you a little.
Fascinating. It's just the details fascinating. Best greens reader on tour.
What?
Best greens reader on tour.
I honestly don't. I mean, it has to be
I know
Denny
you're not-
McCarthy, right? Or
Yeah, Denny
Taylor
probably, yeah,
Montgomery.
Denny,
Like anyone that makes a ton of putts,
Yeah.
it has to be like someone,
Yeah.
one of them.
It's probably them, yeah.
But I mean, I've heard Ben Crane is one of the best at guessing slope with his feet.
Really?
Like ridiculously good.
Wow.
And it's funny. It's again just a process of trial and error.
Yeah. Crazy. You got this? You good? All right.
Where do different green species and types come into play for this? Like, do some break a little bit more than others, or?
So we haven't necessarily found that to be the case. Grain obviously plays a huge factor. So and
Unless
this
you
is-
ask Tim.
Yeah, that's everyone's got such a different point on grain. I'm from the north. We're from the northwest.
Yeah.
We don't have grain.
We don't have grain, yeah.
So like me going out to the southeast and going to courses with grain, I'm still figuring it out. But like originally, Aimpoint said that the grain didn't matter, and I don't know how anyone in the world could say that.
Yeah.
It definitely matters more in some areas. Like Florida specifically has a lot more grain than a lot of places. But I mean, we'll go like we were in Maui. And I've got a really good video. We did our original tour read, and it was like a 10-foot putt, and I think it was like 6 inches out. And then I had Lee, he's from Alabama, I'm like, all right, this grain's going directly with the break. What do you think it is? And he added like 4 inches. Wow. And we put both the tees out, started it on, made it in the center. So grain would probably be the biggest thing more than anything. Mm-hmm. And no one, I think, will ever be able to quantify grain.
Yeah.
Because,
That's a tough one.
Because
It's just a tough
if the
one.
grain's over here, it's going to be different than grain over there. Everyone knows there's no consistency to grain. So like there's no system for it, but that would be the only thing that we've really run across. Different grass heights make a difference in terms of what you need to launch it at, but not necessarily how much it's breaking. That's just more green speed related.
Yeah, it's. I got nothing on that one. You know, like it's in talking to a lot of guys like you who do this every day, all day, and they're like, you know, it's reps and
Yeah.
building the memory bank and familiarity with these types, playing this course and these greens, and the memory bank seems to be the number one thing of just experience playing that particular style because. You know, like you said, the grain's changing, and I mean, how do you quantify it? You know, like you can quantify slope, or you can quantify slope direction and severity of slope. But how do you quantify the impact of the grain? Man, we get to that point. I'm not sure my mind's even ready. I'm not even sure I'm ready for that.
Even just another point, we'll just go around, like Tor reads what Lee does, and that's what I've been doing with him. So we're using a level. We're being very scientific with it. Yeah. We will get to a putt that could be a perfect 2 with no grain, and the putt will not go in. This happens at every golf course in the country.
It's crazy.
We will find putts that no matter what you would have done, you could have been 100% spot on with your slope, getting it right, start line be perfect, and the putt does not go in.
It's crazy.
And like, it happens every time. Every week we see one of these putts, and it's like, it's just putting is weird because you can do everything right and still miss it.
Feel free to blame the greenskeeper on those putts. I mean, it's not my fault. He's going to hang out for a little bit, so if you guys want to chat and talk with Marcus, but I appreciate you being here. Marcus, great stuff. Really,
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks for being here.